Actually, VAPP is an increase to VREF to compensate for the eventual drop in wind intensity near the ground and sudden unexpected changes in wind direction. Maximum and minimum wind additives for either normal or abnormal configurations are prescribed in Embraer publications and company operations manual. Of course, the maximum flat black-carded speed must be respected. The landing field length limited weight, as shown on the AFM, is the maximum weight at which the airplane is capable of landing in 60% of the available dry runway length, crossing the 50-foot height threshold at VREF. That is, the dry runway required is the actual landing distance multiplied by 1.67, 1 divided by 0.60. However, if the runway is wet, the minimum length required is the dry runway required increase by 15% as illustrated. Performance regulations require some corrections in the reported wind for publication of the landing distance charts. The AFM charts are developed considering only 50% of the reported headwind and 150% of the reported tailwind. In addition, the reported wind must be corrected for the aircraft's actual height. That is, a mathematical formula is used to apply a specific wind model to the last 50 foot above ground level travel. The good news is that all of these adjustments are already incorporated in the AFM charts, and no additional corrections need to be made when dispatching the plane. The corrections applied to VREF have an important consequence when landing an aircraft. From the performance perspective, to really reproduce the performance published in the AFM, the threshold must be flown at a height of 50 feet and VREF. If a technique different from this is used, there will be an inconsistency between the resulting performance and the published performance. What if you dispatch a plane assuming no wind on arrival, and once you get there, the control tells you you will be facing a 10 or 20 knot headwind gust? If the crew judges it safe to reduce to VREF shortly before crossing the threshold, the VREF is used and the AFM performance is matched. If the crew decides that the wind correction must be carried all the way to touchdown, there are two possibilities. Go somewhere else, or there is definitely enough runway to carry this extra speed and with no overrun risks. Runway distance for overspeed landings can be reviewed at the Embraer's analysis software and properly checked against actual runway data. Sometimes the aircraft enters final while still at high speed, either because ATC vectored the aircraft this way, or because the crew did not properly manage the aircraft's speed, and the deceleration towards the target approach and reference speeds requires the full length of the approach all the way to the runway. This scenario is riskier than normal and should be avoided. Once you get closer to the threshold, proceed with a landing only if you are absolutely satisfied with your flight conditions. If you are high and/or fast, don't hesitate. Go around at once. The landing flare should be initiated at approximately 30 feet radio altitude. Only a 2 to 3 degree attitude change is required to reduce the rate of descent. Reduce thrust slowly so that upon touchdown, idle is reached. With good flare and thrust coordination, touchdown should occur at VREF approximately. Good flare-thrust coordination is essential. Do not extend the flare with idle thrust, as it will significantly increase landing distance and the resulting high pitch may lead to a tail strike. Reducing to idle before the flare will also require an increase in pitch. Flaring high and reducing the power to off quickly can cause the plane to settle abruptly. Particularly when one engine is inoperative, keep the power on and don't let a high sink rate develop. Do not apply stabilizer trim during the flare. A proper touchdown point is more important than a smooth, greased landing. A very soft touchdown is not essential, nor even desired, particularly if the runway is wet. When a light bounce occurs, maintain or re-establish a normal landing attitude. Increasing pitch can lead to a tail strike. Beware of the increased landing distance and use power as required to soften the second touchdown. When a more severe bounce occurs, initiate a go-around. Do not attempt to land. Press the go-around button and advance the thrust levers to take off go-around. Hold the flare attitude until the engines spool up and reset stabilizer trim. Then follow normal go-around procedures. Pitch attitude awareness is essential during landing so as to avoid aft fuselage contact. Usually, tail strike is caused by unstabilized approach, holding off in the flare to achieve an extremely smooth landing, mishandling of crosswinds or over-rotation during go-around, turbulence or wind shear, and bouncing at landing. Most of the time, more than one cause is involved. Check the approximate nose-up attitude that will lead to a tail strike for each of the ERJ 145 family. The non-flying pilot should monitor attitude during flare and call out if this angle approaches. Some of the keys to avoid tail strike have been said in this video. Always perform stabilized approach. Arrive in the flare on the approach path with a fair speed and attitude. This will prevent you from applying large corrections in the flare. Handle crosswind landings by exercising active control of the sink rate. Do not over-rotate at go-arounds. Make it smooth and timely, rotating to the go-around FD command bars as gentle as the condition requires. Initiating a late go-around after approaching may lead to a tail strike. Remember that both pitch and thrust are required for rotating. So if the engines are still spooling up, when the pilot vigorously pulls the nose up, the thrust may not yet be adequate to support the effort. The tail goes down very rapidly and tail strike can occur before a change to the flight path is made. The preferred crosswind landing technique is to apply drift correction to track the runway heading. During the flare, align the aircraft with the runway centerline, preventing drift by applying into-wind aileron and opposite rudder. After touchdown, immediately start flying the nose wheel smoothly onto the runway. Control the airplane pitch rate while relaxing after column pressure. Nose should not be lowered rapidly in an effort to improve landing performance. This technique provides minimum lift and fully places the airplane's weight on the main gear, thus resulting in increased braking effectiveness. It is more effective than aerodynamic dragging when the nose wheel is held off the runway. Apply forward pressure on the control column and aileron into the wind. Use rudder pedals for directional control. Steering hand wheels should only be used at taxi speeds. Use proper braking techniques to cope with a short landing distance. The airplane should be stopped within the shortest possible distance consistent with safety. If the landing weight is limited by runway length, the use of maximum brake effort is mandatory until it becomes obvious that there is enough remaining runway for the use of milder braking. Generally speaking, to increase carbon brake life, brakes should be operated hot, not at intermediate temperatures. The other parameter that affects brake life is the number of applications. For carbon brakes, the more frequently brake is applied, the less is the life. The recommended braking techniques should be aimed at reducing the number of brake application and optimizing carbon brake temperature. Remember that landing distance performance does not account for the use of reverse thrust, even though it is there for you to use it. Reverse thrust is more effective at high aircraft speeds. Hence, to get its best value, it should be used right after touchdown. It should be used judiciously so as to avoid control difficulties caused by asymmetrical thrust. Avoid use of thrust reverser below 60 knots to avoid the possibility of FOD ingestion. On the other hand, whenever landing on a long runway, you can apply the formula for longer brake life, which is predicated on the use of brakes only, and it is supported by operational data. Follow it. Apply the brakes with no delay after the nose landing gear wheels have touched down. Move directly to a single firm and steady brake application and hold pedal pressure until decelerated to taxi speed. Apply pressure up to a maximum comfortable deceleration. Do not pump the brakes. Keep in mind that brakes perform better when warmed at a constant rate and not subjected to hard use until hot. Only use thrust reversers if necessary. Brake life is improved if thrust reversers are not used. This may seem odd, but it is the nature of carbon brakes. If thrust reversers are necessary, use simultaneously with brakes and stow them as soon as possible. Resist the temptation to make the first turn-off. If your speed is high during your landing roll, extend your rollout to the next appropriate turn-off. During taxiing in, management for the best brake life is oriented to keep the brake within operating temperature range limits by allowing more cooling time and less brake friction time. Let the airplane accelerate to a maximum safe speed. Then use the brakes in one increasingly firm application to slow the airplane. Then release the brakes and allow the airplane to accelerate again. Less frequent use of the brakes with higher braking pressure improves brake life. Do not fall back to the old technique of brake pumping. The safe pilot is the individual that knows how to combine aviation knowledge with skills and experience. Good judgment adds extra proficiency. Practice the stabilized approach concept and accept nothing else than the proper approach speed and flight path. If it is not right, do not hesitate to go around. Set it up again. Stick yourself to this discipline and run to a perfect landing. Then park the aircraft under the applause of your passengers and the admiration of your colleagues.